Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are going to unpack the fascinating source material of Reinhard Bonnke's autobiography, Living a Life of Fire. What we're really doing here is looking at exactly how a massive global spiritual movement starts. We're going to trace this incredible journey that begins with a tiny, almost invisible spark of belief in a really isolated part of the world, and watch it grow, according to the text, into this roaring fire that ultimately impacted millions of people across the African continent. And you know, whether you're looking at this from a theological perspective, a historical lens, or honestly just as a study in how profound personal conviction can reshape human societies, this narrative is absolutely compelling.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start off with the spark of faith, move into a vision for millions, explore the impact of soul winning, look at what building the kingdom actually entails, and wrap it all up with faith in daily life.
All right, part 1, the spark of faith. So, before we look at crowds of literally millions of people, we have to understand the fundamental tension right at the heart of this narrative. It's this clash between secular pragmatism and a really deep spiritual calling. The source material sets this up perfectly. Bonnke's older brother represents this highly pragmatic, post-war mindset, basically telling Reinhard, hey, be a doctor, be a lawyer, be something that counts, because in his eyes, God has no real leverage in this world. But Bonnke's view is entirely different. For him, what truly counts isn't some respectable secular profession, it's salvation. He views reality completely through the lens of eternity and the book of life. And this contrast is absolutely crucial because it grounds the spiritual depth of the book in a very recognizable, everyday societal doubt. It asks a profound question. What does it genuinely mean to make your life count?
Now, to understand Bonnke's answer to that question, the text actually takes us back in time. This wasn't just an isolated decision he made one day, it was a chronological spark. Back in 1922, a man named Louis Graf brought a radical Pentecostal message to a really cold, isolated part of East Prussia. That single act of obedience healed Reinhard's grandfather and converted his father, Hermann. Fast forward to the 1940s, and Hermann survives the absolute horrors of World War II, but his faith is totally intact. He's acutely aware that human justice is flawed, but divine justice, the kind written in the Book of Life, is absolute. And then, that exact same fire is passed down to the 1950s, where a 19-year-old Reinhard is preaching in Berlin. The text masterfully shows us how a single act of belief rippled down through generations to set the stage for a global mission.
Moving right along to part 2, a vision for millions.
Okay, this brings us to a massive turning point in the autobiography where his personal faith scales up in a huge way. Picture this, Bonnke is in Africa, his ministry tent has literally been shredded by a storm, and he needs 30 rand just to pay rent. As he's walking, the text describes a divine intervention where he is challenged to stop thinking so incredibly small. He starts dreaming, maybe of 1 million rand, to buy better trucks and better equipment. But then everything just shifts. He cries out, "No, Lord, I am not asking for 1 million rand, I am asking for 1 million souls." This is a huge pivot from an immediate financial need to an overarching eternal spiritual worldview. He realizes the goal isn't the infrastructure at all, the goal is the people.
And the divine reply he receives forms the ultimate mandate for the rest of his life. You will plunder hell and populate heaven for Calvary's sake. This becomes his defining motto. Think back to his brother's challenge earlier, to be something that counts. Well, this is Bonnke's answer. He isn't going to build buildings or invent railways. He is going to populate heaven. That single sentence becomes the engine driving the massive logistical and spiritual machine that his ministry would eventually become.
Which leads us perfectly into part 3, the impact of soul winning.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is seeing how this spiritual narrative physically materializes. According to the text, when Bonnke prayed for the sick, the physical results were so profound that people left their crutches behind, quite literally, like litter on the ground. They had to instruct a team just to go out and pick them all up and assemble them in a massive pile. This image is a really powerful visual anchor in the autobiography. It shows that the fire they're talking about wasn't just some internal feeling. It was claimed to be a highly observable, physical reality that was altering the physical health of attendees.
And honestly, the scale of these events quickly becomes almost difficult to comprehend. Just look at this number, 455,140. The text presents this not just as some vague crowd estimate, but as narrative data. This represents the actual number of individuals in the kingdom of Wukeri who, in just 5 nights, filled out decision cards and crossed into what Bonnke calls the kingdom of God. I mean, to put that into perspective, that is the population of a major city entirely shifting its spiritual allegiance in less than a week.
But wait, it escalates even further. 1.4 million. In a single series of meetings in Nigeria, 1.4 million new believers were registered. The narrative uses these numbers to prove a very specific point. What secular society deems impossible, this mass, rapid spiritual awakening of millions of people, is becoming possible. Bonnke notes that being a Christian isn't the art of the possible, it's the art of the impossible, and these staggering figures are presented as the primary evidence of that.
Let's look at what this means structurally in Part 4, Building the Kingdom. So when you have 1.4 million people responding in a single week, you face a massive structural problem. How do you actually handle that? The answer was something called the Fire Conference. Bonnke realized pretty quickly he couldn't do it alone, so the strategy shifted to training locals. In one specific instance detailed in the text, 65,000 local workers from completely different denominations, Anglican, Lutheran, Baptist, Charismatic, all came together. They set aside their theological differences just to be equipped. And this was the true genius of the movement. It wasn't just about addition anymore, it was about multiplication. By equipping 65,000 local workers, each one could follow up with, say, 21 new believers. It created this amazing self-sustaining harvest that integrated new converts directly into their local community churches.
And this brilliantly illustrates the structural shift occurring on a national level. During the Wakari meetings, Bonnke is sitting right next to the local king, and they're looking out over a literal sea of 200,000 people. The king is totally awestruck. He didn't even realize he had that many subjects. And Bonnke turns to him and says, "What you are seeing, honorable king, is not your kingdom. What you see tonight is the kingdom of God." It's such a profound moment in the text. It shows the spiritual kingdom superseding the earthly one, and not through some political overthrow, but through the mass, individual transformation of the people who make up that kingdom.
Finally, let's bring it home with Part 5, Faith in Daily Life.
You know, it's so easy to get totally lost in numbers, like millions of people and these massive crusade events. But the autobiography brings this massive macro-level scale right back down to local communities by using a classic biblical analogy, leaven or yeast. Bonnke explains that the kingdom of heaven acts like leaven hidden in dough. It might be totally invisible to the naked eye at first, and it might make a somewhat imperfect appearance in our fallen daily world. But over time, it works its way through the entire batch. Faith acts as this invisible agent of total societal transformation. It doesn't just change where a person believes they go after they die. It fundamentally alters how they live, how they work, and how they interact in their society today. And we see the actual tangible proof of this leaven in a really powerful anecdote about a local school principal. This principal had operated a school, a hospital, and a mission in the district for 20 years. But after just a 7-day crusade, he comes up to Bonnke and says, the whole area is different. He points out that usually, when a famous speaker leaves town, everyone just talks about the speaker. But here, the principal says, I am not hearing from the people about Reinhard Bonnke. I am hearing about Jesus. This perfectly encapsulates that day-to-day societal impact we're talking about. The local culture itself was completely shifted.
As we wrap up this explainer, the text leaves us with this wonderfully joyful realization from Reinhard Bonnke himself. After reflecting on a long life spent as a self-described zero who merely gave away the bread of life, he asks this simple, grinning question. Do I have a great job or what? It really challenges us to look at our own lives, doesn't it? From a tiny spark in 1920s Prussia to millions of lives changed across Africa, this story asks us to reflect. What is the ultimate purpose that drives the actions in your own daily life? Are you doing something that truly counts? Thank you so much for joining me, and I really hope this sparked some fascinating thoughts for you today.